So welcome to Create Your Own School Breakfast Success Story. We're so excited to have you here today. This is a 45-minute webinar, and even though we started a little late, we will still end right on time, I can assure you. So this is what the webinar is going to look like in terms of how our time is going to be spent. I'm going to introduce myself and then just share a little bit of information about No Kid Hungry, and then talk about why it's important to create a breakfast success story. And then I'll dive into the process of creating your own breakfast success story. There's several steps that are involved that help the process. And then I'll end by sharing some resources. And then we'll probably still have a few more minutes for questions. So feel free to, as the webinar continues, to type those questions into the chat box, and we will address them at the very end. So like Emily said, my name is Summer. I'm Summer Kriegshauser. I'm a senior program manager on the No Kid Hungry campaign here at Share Our Strengths. And my focus is on school breakfast expansion and providing those best practices for breakfast after the bell model. I am one of the team members who regularly creates school breakfast success stories. So I'm so pleased to be able to share my process with you, and hopefully you'll be able to walk away with some good nuggets of information to help you create your own story. So let's create, or let me find out actually who's on the line. I have a poll set up. Emily's launching that right now, but I would love to know who is on the line and how many of you have created your own breakfast success stories, if you're veterans at this process, or if you're brand new to this process. So I'm going to leave the poll open for just a few more seconds. Looks like we're getting almost 2/3 of the folks have voted. Maybe 5 more seconds and then we'll close the poll. All right. So we got about 2/3 of you responding. So it looks like 77% have not created a breakfast success story and 23% have. So this is really great. I think this webinar will be very beneficial for everyone who's on the line. We have a lot of good information to share. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, just a little bit about No Kid Hungry. No Kid Hungry is a campaign by Share Our Strengths. Share Our Strengths is an organization dedicated to ending hunger and poverty. And as you can see by the graphic, Share Our Strengths is more of the parent company, and No Kid Hungry is one of the campaigns. And really at No Kid Hungry, we work to end hunger by increasing access to the federal meals program, specifically summer meals, after school meals, and school breakfast. We also provide families with nutrition education, and we work with elected officials across the country to pass policy to move the needle on ending childhood hunger. And then on top of that, No Kid Hungry's Center for Best Practices team, which is the team that I sit on, is comprised of program, policy, and research experts that are committed to providing information and resources to help end childhood hunger. So when you see that logo at the bottom of the screen, Center for Best Practices, that's what it's referring to, this team that we have. And we also have our own website, which I will show you later on in the webinar. All right, so let's talk about why it's important to create a school breakfast success story. So we know that kids who eat breakfast score higher on tests, they attend more days of school, and all together that leads to higher graduation rates. And that doesn't even take into account the effect that breakfast has on classroom dynamics. This could be contributing to reducing behavioral issues, reducing the number of nurse visits that we see because kids are no longer distracted by hunger. So it's important to recognize that school breakfast is a big deal and to promote and celebrate that. And within that, really celebrate schools and districts that are just knocking it out of the park with school breakfast. We also know that there are several barriers to students participating in traditional cafeteria breakfast, which takes place before the school day starts, and that means students must eat in the cafeteria. We also know that by changing those logistics of where the breakfast program is served and what time it's served, that can better accommodate the needs of students. And when that happens, we see breakfast participation increase. This slide shows exactly that. It shows the participation rates for those 3 breakfast after the bell models that we know are the most successful at increasing access to school breakfast. We have breakfast in the classroom, grab and go, and second chance breakfast. And I'm not going to read the definitions, but they're here. But school breakfast success stories elevate these models. They elevate them in action, and they can educate and inspire other schools to implement these models. So, knowing the benefits of breakfast after the bell and the breakfast of school breakfast in general, success stories can showcase a school's breakfast after the bell program. This is important because perhaps parents or community members might not be aware of the program. So this is education to the community and parents. Success stories can also highlight the work of school and district stakeholders and staff that have made the school breakfast program a win. Success stories can be a way to elevate the work of champions that are in the school system that may not otherwise get recognized. Success stories can also bring positive press to a school or a district, and that's always a win. And then success stories can inspire other schools. Like I was saying, they can inspire other schools and districts to implement breakfast after the bell, or just test out other tactics that maybe they haven't thought of to expand their own breakfast program. Okay, so now we know why it's important to create a breakfast success story. So let's dive into how to actually do it. All right, there are many ways that you can create a school breakfast success story. But here at No Get Hungry, we found that it's most helpful to follow these set of steps. So first, you want to define your goal. Then you're going to gather information about the breakfast program. You want to make sure to document your program visually as well. So you're going to need pictures. You're going to take all of that information and put that story together. And then you need to seek approval from the school to make sure they're okay with what you've put together. And then you're free to publish and promote that story. So let's dive deep into each one of these specific steps and learn more about it. So when beginning the process of creating a breakfast after the bell success story, it's helpful to think about the ultimate goals that you want to accomplish by sharing your story. Defining your goals will help inform how you craft that particular success story. So do you want to inspire others? Success stories can influence other schools, like I've been saying, and districts to adopt innovative breakfast delivery models in maybe ways that they haven't considered before, or learn about different aspects of the program that they could maybe test out themselves. Perhaps you want to spread awareness about the benefits of breakfast after the bell. Success stories can illuminate how the breakfast program has benefited various aspects of the school. This includes maybe attendance rates improving, behavioral issues lessening, and really you can talk about the overall student experience and how students are being impacted by breakfast in a positive way. Do you want to share a how-to for others to replicate? Success stories can tell the full scope of the implementation process, which includes any challenges and solutions. And it's important to not be afraid to add in those challenges, because where there's a challenge, there's a solution. And people really want to know that. They want to know the real aspects of the breakfast program. So adding them in can be very important as well. Do you want to demonstrate leadership and garner recognition for the program? Success stories can also show how creative, unique, and savvy a school is by sharing the details of their breakfast program and giving recognition to the school and the staff that made it happen. Once you figure out what you want to accomplish in creating the success story, now you get to gather the information to write your story. So this means collecting all of that information from key stakeholders in the school or district. And this could be the principal, it could be the school nutrition director, it could be a breakfast champion, such as maybe a wellness coach or an athletic coach. This could also be a teacher or a custodian that has played a big role in the school breakfast program. It's important to have a list of questions to ask the school stakeholders that are ready to go, because these stakeholders often are very busy individuals, may have a lot on their plate. So having those questions at the ready can be very helpful for everyone. You can gather information in person if you regularly visit the school, or it's fine to gather information by phone or email. The vast majority of the success stories that I've written have been by gathering information via email, and I got all the information I need. It may take a couple of interviews to get all that information, though. You may have your set of questions at the ready, and your principal or a teacher that you're speaking to answers all of those questions, and after reading those answers, you have follow-up questions about what they said because you want even more information. That's totally fine, but just be mindful of their time, knowing that you might need a couple of email exchanges or even phone interviews to get all the information you need. If you can, get quotes from the school stakeholders. This is really important because it personalizes the success story. When making a success story, you are not going to be just presenting a set of facts about the school breakfast program. You are going to literally be crafting a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And quotes really add a personal touch to that, so that's very important. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So I know this slide looks overwhelming. We're not going to be reading this whole slide. This is a list of questions that you could possibly use to ask the school stakeholders to get information about the breakfast story that you will be creating. So when you're thinking about the story that you want, and sort of mapping out those elements in your head, think of everything you'd want to know as a reader about that school breakfast program. So let's take a couple of the bullets in this slide as an example. Let's look at the first 3 bullets, which are essentially a set of questions. So the first one is, what changes to the breakfast program have contributed to its newfound success? So this is a very open-ended question, and of course you can reword any of these questions here, add or take away. But this first question, you could get a lot of information back from the school stakeholder that you reached out to. So this could be a question where you actually seek follow-up information, depending on how the stakeholder answers that question. All right, bullet point number 2, which breakfast after the bell model did the school implement? We absolutely want to have this information. We want to know what model they chose. Hopefully the stakeholder that you reached out to will give more information. But again, this is why it might take a couple times to interview that stakeholder to get all the information you need. And then let's look at the third bullet and the questions contained there. So what was the breakfast program like before the changes, and were there barriers preventing students from participating? Okay, so these are 2 very important questions, because as you create your story, you're going to want to present a before and after of the breakfast program. You're going to want to know what their new breakfast model is, but you also want to provide information as to why they changed over to that model, why were students not even eating breakfast before, what were the barriers that you were addressing. So these are good examples, these top 3 questions of the kind of questions that you would ask stakeholders to gather information about your story. So now that you have hopefully all of the information you need, it's very important to remember the visual component of the breakfast success story. You want to show and tell the story. Now, if you can, get permission from the principal to visit the school and take the pictures. But if you can't visit the school, that's absolutely fine. Perhaps the school is too far in geographic distance, or scheduling just isn't working out. Like I said, all of the vast majority, of the success stories I've written, I have not visited the school to obtain information or take pictures. I emailed either the principal or the school nutrition director. So if you cannot take pictures yourself and be there, then request that you get pictures from the principal or the school nutrition director. And it's best to get pictures that are taken in high pixelation. But if you're using a smartphone, that's pretty standard these days, so you shouldn't have a problem there. But it's important to get high pixelation because you might want to crop the photos. You might want to zoom in on a photo. So you want to be able to have that flexibility, and you also want to be able to have several photo options to choose from. And you can choose those photos depending on how actually your story flows, and you can pick pictures that correspond most to your story. Some of the picture suggestions that I would recommend are getting pictures of the Breakfast After the Bell program in action. We want to see the program. Getting breakfast food items, that's something that is of interest to people. Any equipment such as grab-and-go carts, rolling coolers. It's important to know that not all schools have the same equipment. So there is an interesting piece of equipment that's added to increasing breakfast participation. That may be something that you want to capture. It's also great to have students eating breakfast. This isn't always available because you may need a waiver from the school to get pictures of the students. And so if you don't have that, that's okay. There's still lots of great pictures of the Breakfast After the Bell program that you can obtain that don't have students. If you can get students, also having them helping with setting up and cleaning up is really great to show, because that's often a question about what does the cleanup look like, especially in breakfast in the classroom. What does the setup look like? Are students helping? So capturing these in photos can be very helpful to add to your story. Okay, so now that you have all of the information, including any pictures or visuals, it's time to craft your story. Now, there are several very simple yet effective platforms that you can build out your story on. And my favorites are Microsoft Word and Microsoft PowerPoint and Google Docs and Google Slides. These have a lot of flexibility in terms of text that you can enter in, pictures, graphics, arranging the story visually how you'd like it to be. And if you don't have access to Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, Google Docs and Slides are a completely free application that you can get online if you go to Google. Now, the total length of your story should be no more than 2 pages. That includes space for pictures. This is because you want a front and a back to your story. That way, if you print it off, you can print off the story on the front and back, and you just have one piece of paper. You don't want to create an entire booklet of a success story. In terms of pictures, you want to plug in your pictures throughout the story. 2 to 3 pictures is completely sufficient. If you have any breakfast icons or graphics or logos that you want to include in your story, be sure to leave space for those as well. And when you're thinking about putting your story together, know that the story should have a beginning, middle, and end. And I said this earlier, you're not just presenting a list of facts about the school, you're really creating a narrative that's going to be inspiring, that's going to be positive, and really elevate the high quality work of that school. So think of the story as a puzzle you're putting together. You know, you have all these pieces of information, you asked all these questions. It might be helpful to do an outline first based on the information you obtain and think about where it would be good to add in a picture. So things like that can help you sculpt your story. It's also helpful to start the story with a celebratory detail, because this will immediately showcase the success of the breakfast program and start people off on a positive note. And then you let the details about the program unfold, such as why the breakfast program changed in the first place, the logistics of the old breakfast program versus the new breakfast program, the benefits that have resulted from the new breakfast program, the new breakfast model, and always include quotes from school stakeholders throughout the story. Oh, one more thing, sorry about that. End the story on an upbeat note. This is helpful because it leaves people with a positive thing to remember, or if you know the school has future plans that they want to continue to enhance the breakfast program, you can certainly mention those. Something else you can add is at the very end, which is not going to be a part of your story, but it's sort of an informational sentence at the very end of the story. If you have stakeholders that you know are going to be reading the story and wanting to find out more about maybe improving their own breakfast programs, you can have a sentence at the end giving your contact information or directing them to a specific website. And then finally, with the title, I find it helpful to wait until the very end of the story to craft your title, because you want the title to really capture the sentiment of the story. And so if you haven't written the story yet, it might be hard to pin down a title. So that's something to think about as well. Okay, So I find it very helpful to review other success stories to see how the story arc flows, to see what details they've included, how they've utilized the quotes, and really help you in guiding your writing process. So I want to take a look at this example, which is one of the success stories that's on the Center for Best Practices website. It's hyperlinked in this PowerPoint. So when you get these slides after this webinar, you'll be able to directly link to this. But as you can see, this success story is one page. There is not a back to this page. It has 2 solid paragraphs, and within those paragraphs, it tells the entire breakfast success story. So let's look more closely at these paragraphs. Okay, so let's take a look first at the title. This is essentially the title in the very first paragraph. The title is action-oriented. Let's read it. Breakfast in the Classroom Invigorates Mornings at Holland Woods Middle School. It's descriptive. It talks about breakfast in the classroom. You know the story. You know what the story is going to be about, and it has action verbs. That's very important to draw the reader in. All right, next, let's look at the beginning sentences, which provide vital information about the story. Now, because the story is only one page, we had to be real careful to cut out any fluff that doesn't directly enhance the story. So the first couple sentences, through trial and error, Holland Woods Middle School realized that meeting students' needs was the best way to start the day. And then it talks about the principal and the school nutrition director, and that they launched Fuel Period, a breakfast in the classroom program. So you have the detail, the fun name, Fuel Period, and then they have other important details of there's 475 students, grades 6 through 8. It started in the 2017-2018 school year. These are important details to include in the story. And as the first paragraph continues, as your eyes continue to move down the paragraph, more details are revealed, right? Let's see, let's look at these. It talks about, if you can see, the breakfast started at 7:25. Kids were quickly trying to eat at their locker while socializing with friends. So what you're seeing here is details of the old program and why it didn't work. So essentially, it's revealing those barriers that were occurring that were preventing students from participating in the breakfast program. I also want to highlight an important data point here. The sentence says, additionally, even though the school provided all students breakfast, no cost thanks to the community eligibility provision, breakfast participation was only at 22.3% of total enrollment. So this is important because this is the before and after, right? So now we have an opportunity to compare breakfast participation rates after their new model was implemented, because now we know that what the participation rate was before the implementation happened. I also want to note that we end this paragraph with a quote from the principal, which also personalizes it. And he talks about the old system. He says, this system just seemed to de-emphasize breakfast and getting the proper start to the day for students. So we are saying here is that this is part one of the story, right? We know that there was problem. We hear details about it. We got the old participation rate, which wasn't great. So now let's look at the last paragraph, which is also the second paragraph. This is essentially part two of this story. So I want to first highlight this sentence because I want to bring it to your attention. Serving breakfast, and I'm reading it to you now, serving breakfast after the official start of the school day and bringing it into the classroom brought new life into the breakfast program. This is important because now we're talking about Fuel Period, the new breakfast program, and it also links the way the title, the language in the title. The title was, use the word invigorate, I don't know if you remember, but it used the word invigorate, and so we're seeing that same language. So there's active verbs continue throughout this paragraph and continue throughout to keep life in this breakfast story. I also want to highlight, there we go, so that next sentence about Fuel Period. So Fuel Period brought the breakfast participation up to 57.29% of total student enrollment. So that then links the first paragraph to the second paragraph, and it shows the before and after. The before was with the old breakfast program, there was only 22.3% participation, but now we have 57.29%. These numbers are important because these are stats that a lot of folks care about, and it's a solid way to illuminate how successful the breakfast program has been. The rest of this paragraph talks about the highlights of the breakfast program. As you read it, you see all the great things are happening. It talks about how the teachers are liking breakfast. And then we ended this paragraph with a quote from the school nutrition director. She says, "Don't be afraid to do what's best for kids. It's the right thing to do." So this is a very heartfelt quote, which is a great way to end it. And so this is part 2 of the story. It kicks us off with vital information about the current breakfast program, fuel period, and then it reveals the old breakfast model and, it talks about the new breakfast model and why it works beautifully. So I just want to highlight this whole success story all together visually. So we start out with an action-oriented title, right? And then there's part 1 of the story, right? We talk about the reason for the breakfast change, the type of change that was made, important data points. There's a quote in there. And then you can see in the big story, you have a picture. And the picture adds a visual and breaks up the quote. And as you can see, it's a picture of a student. We did get permission from the school to be able to publicize this. And then in the middle, there's another quote. And this is another quote from the principal. This is a great way to break up the text, break up part 1 of the story and part 2 of the story, and just add another personal touch to the success story. And then we have part 2 of the story, which includes information about the new breakfast program, the new participation rate, a quote, and yet another picture. And then we have at the very bottom of the page, there are 2 sentences that are offering more information if you want it. Again, this is not technically part of the story, but it's helpful if other school stakeholders are reading it and want to know more about a breakfast after the bell program, or if you're in a specific state, you might want to give out your email if you are a grant-making organization or something of the like. So this sentence says, if you'd like to learn more about breakfast after the bell, visit No Kid Hungry Center for best practices, and if you'd like help with your Michigan breakfast program, and then it has the contact information of this individual. So obviously this is for Michigan. And then I'd also like to point out that there are multiple graphics throughout this success story. So at the very top, we have school graphic, Holland Woods Middle School, then there's 3 colorful apples at the top. And at the very top, the very bottom, we have both the Michigan Department of Education and the No Kid Hungry logos. So it really rounds out nicely in terms of having high quality text to craft the story, but then visuals to go along with it as well. All right, so now that you have a complete story, you will need to obtain final approval from the school stakeholders you interviewed. Now, any school stakeholder that you connected with that gave you information about the school needs to review the success story you created. It's best to email them a copy. That way, if they want to add track changes, they can, or add information that if there's anything wrong with it, they should look for any details that are incorrect and let you know. If they're not comfortable with the way you describe the breakfast program, maybe they want to use different pictures or logos. Any of these requested changes will require you to change the story, because you need approval until you can publish this story. So this is a very important step in getting your story out there. Okay, so once you have your approval, pat yourself on the back, because congratulations, you've created a breakfast after the bell story. And now you can publish your story. One of the best ways to promote your story is through social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. But in order for you to promote your story on these platforms, you need to have it hyperlinked, right? So it needs to live somewhere online. It's very popular for a success story to live on that school's website. That way you can hyperlink the URL and blast that out on social media. If you don't have that ability, you can always use Google Drive and you will get a link from there, and then you can promote it that way. It's also super fun to include these success stories in e-newsletters, the local newspaper, blog posts, or you can print off hard copies and hand them out at events. But also please send them to us. We would love, love, love to see what you're doing and what kind of success stories you are creating, because we share them as well. So send them to us and we will blast them out. And to wrap up, I want to show you our No Kid Hungry Center for Best Practices website. Hyperlinked here is all the places that you can get those success stories that have already been written up. We have one-pagers and we have videos as well. So let's click on the Center for Best Practices so I can just take you through what the file path is to get to that success story. So hopefully you have all been to our Center for Best Practices website. If not, welcome, welcome. It's great to have you. I'm going to click on programs here. Oh, my mouse is a little bit funny. And it's going to take me through. I'm going to scroll down and school breakfast because that's what we've been talking about. And then I'm in the school breakfast section. I'm going to scroll all the way down and we have this wonderful section just for school breakfast success stories. And this will give you access. All of our resources are free on our website, but this will give you access. It's taking a little bit longer to load. But to all of the success stories that are already written up that you can look at as an example. You can review the success story that I went in depth with you today. We might not have a website right now. I don't know what's happening. We might have to move on from this demonstration here. Oh, here we go. Very exciting. So we can scroll down and Emily, do you want to open up the one-pagers? Yeah. So as you can see, there are several stories to choose from. You click on those hyperlinked links and they will pop up for you. So hopefully you'll get a chance to read more of these stories and see how other stories have been crafted, what details were included, and what the focus of the stories were. So with that, we still have a few more minutes for questions. If there are any questions, please type them in. All right, it says, if there is time, can you share an example of a tweet or other social media post with one of these stories? Might be helpful to see how we get them from a one-page handout to a 280-character tweet. Yes, I totally understand. So first, as long as you have a URL that you can copy into the tweet, that's helpful. And you can say something very action-oriented. Let's take the example of the Holland Woods Middle School. Let's see, what was the title? I think breakfast in the classroom invigorates mornings at Holland Woods Middle School. I mean, you could even take that title and put that in a tweet and then put learn more about the breakfast program here. And then you copy that URL and you put it in a tweet. So really, you just want a really descriptive, action-oriented sentence that's going to draw the reader in. And then they will click on that hyperlink and then they will be transported to the web page where the success story lives. Says another question we have is this webinar eligible for creditable hours under the USDA's professional standards? I'm so sorry, it's not. If I had the power to do that right now, I would give you credit, but unfortunately it's not. I'm very sorry about that. Any other questions? Let's see, we have just a few more minutes. I do sometimes get questions about if I ever have trouble getting pictures for my story, because sometimes, parents don't want their kids' pictures taken, and that's totally fine. And so, or there's just not great pictures that are taken of the program. They're just not lit very well, and it's too much of an ask to ask, a teacher or the school nutrition director to go take another round of photos for me. So I will use stock photos, and by stock photos, I mean photos that the No Kid Hungry team has taken out on their school site visits with their really high quality cameras that they know specifically what kind of shots they're looking for and the angle and the lighting. And I will make sure that those pictures are relevant to the story, they make sense in the story, and that the school stakeholders that I have spoken to have approved of those pictures in the story as well. So it might be just pictures of, you know, grab-and-go carts or breakfast food that's, you know, similar, not necessarily stock photos of different children in the school. Any other questions? I'm so pleased we're getting you out at 45 past the hour, like promised. So with that, I want to thank you all for attending. Thank you again for your patience with our technical difficulties. There will be a survey sent out about this webinar, so please fill that out. Let us know what you liked about it and what other types of webinars you'd like to see from us, but we will also send out the PowerPoint slides so you have all that information as well. Take care.